There we are. Hopefully you can see what I'm seeing. Right. So I'll just get kicking off. Yes, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to start the presentation by mentioning something which might seem unlikely at this stage, but basically what I'm going to say is within probably within the next 4 years, we're likely to be seeing direct brain interfaces, which will allow us to not only control the devices that we use, the Internet of Technology devices, everything from fridges to mobile phones to headsets, but also to actually take in information from these devices to communicate with each other and these devices directly. Now, I'm just hoping to get your attention with that because things are moving very, very fast in this world. Now, as you so kindly introduced me, Medea, my background is about 21 years in digital communication. I've been working with Google, the Chartered Institute of Marketing. I've got a company called Encore Reality, which wins a lot of awards for virtual and augmented reality. And I'm now working with a company called Riot Digital, who are responsible for deployment and delivery solutions in virtual and augmented reality for the likes of Lenovo and Tesla, both of whom we partnered with. Now, the reason that we're talking about augmented and virtual reality today is that it's an incredibly fast-moving and fast-growing industry, and it already was, as you can see here, between 2018 and 2020, it had already expanded by easily 25%. But what this graph fails to show, because this is actually charting its growth pre-COVID, but with COVID, the growth has increased exponentially. I've gone from running a couple of organizations that were quite busy to running 5 organizations which are so busy that we can barely keep up with the market because so many things have happened. People can't travel to see each other internationally. People can't travel locally to see each other. People are trying to use the likes of Zoom and Skype and Teams as we are right now, which is great and is actually speeding up and reducing the cost for a lot of aspects of industry. But at the same time, they're realizing its limitations versus the real world meetings and education and so forth that we had before, and interaction with physical objects. So there's been this increase of demand, increase of requirement, but also increase of realization that there are aspects of the physical world that we miss, that we need to bring back, but at the moment we can't. So we need a solution. And that solution has been augmented and virtual reality. So in terms of future changes, I'm just going to go through these quite briefly, and then I'm going to go into the specific industries that are benefiting from this. But I'll start with the actual hardware and software and the changes that have been made. The thing to watch at the moment, the thing to keep your eye on is wearable augmented reality. So augmented reality is, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail later on, augmented reality is where you look through a device like a mobile phone and it projects digital or virtual or three-dimensional graphics onto the real world around you, which is fine, but not everybody wants to be going around like that, pointing their phones at things. It takes up your hands, it's not ideal, it's not professional. So what's going to change now is that your phone will continue to do the hard work. It contains all the processors and all the spatial hardware necessary to know where you're looking and what you're looking at and where you are. But glasses will connect directly to your phone so that you can have your hands free. Now, as you can see from this example, which is a company called Enrio out of Beijing, it will also be looking at the world in binocular vision. It will be using 2 sensors so that it can see the world as your eyes can. So it will get the sense of depth and distance and be using something that we call LiDAR. And LiDAR is an ability to range and work out the distances from you to other objects, which with the right power of processor, which a mobile phone is perfectly capable of doing, will allow it to model the world around you, actually create 3-dimensional representations of the world around you. So why is that significant? It means that when you look at an object, your device can then actually annotate, it can actually stick a virtual object to that real world object that only you can see. Now that can be useful in terms of industrial applications. It can be useful in terms of sending information to and from remote people, in terms of, let's for instance say you're in an oil platform and you're looking at a pipe, and that pipe is too hot, or it's vibrating too much, or it's too high a pressure, you'll be able to see that data projected onto that device, onto that pipe, which is going to be incredibly useful. But this can be used for everything from looking at the pricing to the ingredients of a product that you're looking at in a shop. It can be used for communicating with your friends and family when you're walking down the street. It can be used for navigation, which we're going to go into in a little bit more detail as well. What I've discovered in the 21 years that I've been working in general marketing is that people don't just perceive the world through their eyes. They perceive the world through a number of different things, and one of the major things that we perceive the world through is tactile, is touch. Now, it's all very well to say that we can use augmented reality to pick up an object in virtual reality, but if you can't see that, then, or if you can't feel it, then it doesn't really feel as if you're interacting with it. Up until now, we've had haptic gloves. Now, haptic just means it creates force feedback. It creates the sensation of your hand touching something, coming to rest on something, and the actual sensation of touch as well. But these gloves, and I've tried some of them, there's a company called Haptics that I was lucky enough to try their gloves in London last year. It was fantastic. It felt like I had a tiny digital fox walking around on the palm of my hand. I could feel its paw pads. I could pick it up and put it down. It was incredible. But the gloves were about this size. They were attached to a large computer, which was huge and sounded like a hairdryer because it was running so hot, and it wasn't practical. You know, it will be, but it wasn't. So what's happening now is that companies like Tesla Suit and Sense Glove are bringing out consumer level haptic gloves, things that you can just put on, like what you can see on the screen here. They're very small, they use magnets and servos, and they allow you to do everything, well, almost everything that you could do with these haptics gloves, but they're practical. And that means that actually your average consumer will be able to wear these, and they're only going to get smaller and lighter and easier to use as time goes on. So that's going to add tactility to our experiences. Another thing which is going to be very important is eye tracking and hand tracking. So I'll describe what these mean. Eye tracking is literally as it sounds. The device that you're wearing, whether it's a virtual reality headset or a pair of augmented reality glasses, can see where you're looking, and it can see what, therefore, you're looking at. So that allows you to control objects in the virtual or augmented reality world simply by looking at them. Now that means that you're not having to use a controller to scroll over and select something. You just look at it and blink and it will know that it's being interacted with. Hand tracking is similar. It means that you can use your hands and the device can recognize and see your hands so that you can reach out and pick up objects, again without any controllers, and again without any need to put down physical objects in the real world. It can also recognize gestures, so if you go like that, it will select it. If you go like that, it will expand it. And this is going to make the world a lot easier. It's going to free up our hands so that we can use these glasses in the real world without breaking away from what we're doing. So a bit more like a radio than a television. Now, if you've ever tried to get ready for work in the morning with the television on, you'll know how much that slows you down because you're looking at it. Whereas if you're listening to the radio, you can passively take in information without it slowing you down. Well, this is what we're aiming for in the extended reality world. And then we have speech control, voice control. Now, many of you are probably using this already, either for searching on Google or for, you might have a home assistance device. And you'll know that I mean, I live in Scotland and these devices struggle with the Scottish accent, but, and you may find this where you are as well. If you're American, it works great, but they are getting better all the time. And that means that we, again, will have our hands free and we can just ask the thing, open this app, go to this section, and in many cases they won't respond to you through your ears, they'll respond to you through bone resonance, so that it's something that you can hear but nobody else can hear. And it also means that it's not going to get in the way of the sounds around you. You could be cycling down the street and if there's a car behind you, you'll still hear it, but you'll still be able to hear what this device is telling you. So that's a really good innovation as well. So those three things. And here's another thing that's important, because I'm working with industries which use augmented reality in the workplace, but so far many of these don't have the ability to see what they're looking at, where they're looking. They can place a heads-up display, a display over your eyes, that will give you information as you're doing your work, but it doesn't connect to the real world. So this is where these two innovations come in. This one is called SLAM, so it says Simultaneous Location and Mapping. That means that it's looking at the world around you and it's taking it in, it knows where you are, and as you're walking around, it's building up that three-dimensional picture of the world. What we see here in the screen is called a point cloud, which is literally just a large number of points which have been recognized for distance and shape. But this is getting a lot simpler to do. It used to be that it required vast amounts of money to be spent on laser devices, which you would have to place on site and move from position to position to position and gradually build up a picture. But now we can do this live within something the size of a mobile phone. You've seen the new Apple phones and Apple tablets can do this, where you can just walk around and it will start to create this picture as we're moving. Now that means that not only can we overlay digital information onto the real world around us, but we can actually build up what we call a digital twin, which is effectively a digital representation of the physical world. And if everybody is using glasses and headsets and phones which are doing this constantly, then this digital world is being created and updated continuously by everybody who's within it. So it means that everybody will ultimately be able to access an accurate, up-to-date representation of the physical world, wherever that happens to be. Oops. Finally, let's come back to the direct brain interface. Now, this is the final frontier, not only controlling our extended reality, virtual and augmented reality equipment, but ultimately allowing us to entirely bypass our sensory apparatus, our eyes, our ears, our fingers, and even our noses, so that we're not only consuming information, but we're able to communicate with each other and the Internet of Things, Internet-enabled devices around us directly. Now, this might sound like science fiction, but things have moved very, very fast. Neuralink, which Elon Musk is working on, is trying to implant very, very fine sensor wires into the brain, which is great, but I know a number of people who are anaesthetists and surgeons, and they will always say, if you can avoid surgery, avoid surgery. And if you can avoid bypassing the blood-brain barrier, which is how our brain protects itself against pathogens and infections, you should always try to do that. So personally, I don't think that Neuralink is the way forward. It's an interesting direction, but I don't think it's something that's going to achieve mass uptake because the potential issues are too great. There's something called temporal interference. Now, temporal interference has already been used in Parkinson's patients who experience uncontrollable tremors throughout their body. And using this, it basically triangulates a number of non-bioactive signals, so electromagnetic frequencies which are too high in frequency to interact with the physical world, or certainly to interact with your physical tissues. But if you cross them over in three directions, they interfere with each other. Temporarily, they slow each other down to within a bioactive frequency, to within a frequency which will actually cause your brain to resonate. Now, because it's triangulated, this means that ultimately, non-invasively, you will be able to stimulate very accurately portions of your brain, which might stimulate the color blue or the sensation of the smell of cornflowers or anything. It would probably have to be calibrated to each individual. And again, this is speculation on my part. The neurosurgeons that I've spoken to about this and the electrical engineers that I've spoken to about this say it is possible, but we're probably quite a way away from it. But personally, that's what I think is going to be the future of direct brain interfaces. Right now, it's going to be more about controlling devices than taking in information, and that is already possible. And I'm already working with people who are using devices like this that you simply slip over your head, and by thinking in a certain way, you can get your objects to behave in a certain way. So now I'm going to move on to how this is going to affect us in the future and even right now. Everything that I'm going to show you is happening right now. There is nothing speculative, there is nothing that I'm basing in the future, okay? So, first of all, I need to differentiate for you the difference between virtual and augmented reality, because in my world, I always assume that people know the difference, but actually, why should they? So, virtual reality is when you are entirely immersed in the digital world. You can't see the physical world around you, you can only see the digital world that you're within. Augmented reality is similar, but you can see the physical world around you. So all of the digital overlays, all of the digital information is placed onto the world around you, and ideally properly connects to that world, recognizes it and sticks to it. Doesn't always, but that's the ideal. Okay, so that's our difference. I'm going to start with virtual reality and I'll show you 4 innovations there, and then I'm going to move on to augmented reality and I'll show you 4 innovations there. Now remember, these are all happening right now. If you want verification of this, I can show you because I'm working on them right now. First of all, medicine. Now, an organisation that I work with, Riot Digital, we're all about taking sensor information from the real world, whether that's visual or whether that's tactile, whether that's vibration, temperature, whatever, and then taking it into the virtual reality world. That means that people who are distant, maybe in 5 different locations simultaneously, can see what's going on in a physical location. Now, the company that we partnered with are called Tesla Suit, and they have created a full body haptic interface, which is packed with sensor technology. It can pick up on your temperature, your range of movement. It can pick up on your galvanic skin response. That's basically how conductive your skin is, according to your sweat and conductivity, that kind of thing. It can also limit your range of movement. It can create vibration responses. It can raise or lower your temperature, and it can even control your muscles to a certain extent using a TENS actuator, which sends small electrical impulses calibrated to your galvanic skin response, so it's not too strong or too weak, to actually stimulate your muscles. Now, the applications for this in medicine, as anybody who's even thought about it, been in the world of medicine can imagine, are limitless. It's already being used for stroke rehabilitation. It's already been used for physiotherapy. It's already been used for all sorts of forms of medical application. And we are currently introducing it to the Australian medical system, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, the American health services as well, because it means that you can treat people remotely, you can see how well they're responding remotely, you can give somebody who's stuck at home because they have no mobility access to a physiotherapist or a surgeon remotely, where they don't even have to leave their home, but that physiotherapist, that surgeon, knows more about them than they could even possibly learn if they were to be in the same room together. So that's incredible, and that's only one of the applications for this outfit. I could go on all day. So next, my background originally, apart from marketing, was in education. I'm a trained lecturer for the Chartered Institute of Marketing and Google and the education system in Scotland. So I always like to see things from the perspective of educating people. Now, the problem that we have in Scotland is, particularly where I am right now, is that we, up until yesterday, were in a level 4 lockdown. I'm sure that you guys are familiar with what that feels like. So we can't go anywhere, and it's meaning that our university students, many of whom are actually locked into their halls of residence and are not allowed to leave, and many of whom can't go to university. A major part of the higher education income for our country comes from overseas students, particularly from China, and they are not coming to Scotland at the moment because it's not safe. So this is a serious problem for our education system, from primary, secondary, further education to higher education. So how do we solve it? We solve it by creating virtual environments which allow people to be educated together. Now, 2 years ago, I did a presentation for a university on digital learning environments, which have existed for a long time, which allow people to see the same slides, communicate verbally to each other, and even do what we're doing now and be on screens and look at each other. But I've been speaking to, and a personal experience of, the importance of group activity when you're in an educational environment, of practical immersive environments when you're in an educational environment. The old Confucius saying was, I hear, I forget, I see, I remember, I do, I understand. Now, you can't do in this environment. You can't communicate properly in this environment because so much of our communication isn't just verbal, and it isn't even just looking each other's faces. It's hand gestures, it's body language, it's movement, and also the ability to go off and have small conversations or brainstorming sessions in one corner of the room, to have a private conversation with your lecturer or with somebody else. You can't do that in this environment. You can do that in virtual reality. Everything that you can do in the real world, with the exception of actually physical manipulation of objects, you can do in the virtual reality world. So I've been pursuing this like a dog with a bone for the last 2 years. And now we have the technology to do it. Now, the problem that we had was it wasn't perfect, much of it isn't. You're limited to a certain number of people in many cases, or it's quite slow, or it requires everybody to have a headset, which of course very few people do. It requires very, very high internet speeds, which many people don't have any access to internet. So what we did was we came up with a system that can be used on the web. It's web-based, it doesn't require any downloads, which can be a problem with firewalls and all that kind of thing. So you just click on a link, you're there. We came up with a solution which we can send people a box, like the one you see on the left there, and that box, if required, can have all of the headsets that are needed, and each of these headsets has a puck which connects it to the internet through 3, 4, or 5G internet, anywhere in the world, any network in the world. And that means that people can access it. It's very secure, military-grade encryption, and it doesn't require that person to have home Wi-Fi or broadband. We were asked initially to go to Botswana and to give 500,000 students, school students, access to the internet. Now, we were not going to be giving all of them a box or a virtual reality headset. We would have bankrupted the government. So we needed to come up with a way to do this with very, very cheap entry-level tablets or phones, and then give each of those a SIM card which could access the internet. Now in Botswana, they're not big fans of Vodafone. I don't know why, but they just hate them. But that's the main connection for that country, and it has a bit of a monopoly. But we don't need to use that. We can use something called an AnyNet SIM, which will just connect to any network in that area. And then we can also measure where that device is gone using a mobile device management system. So that means we can see where the tablet is. We can see who's using it. We can see what it's connected to and how much data is going up and down the line. We can see whether somebody's using Netflix on it, and we can block that because obviously that costs money. And we can see if it's been stolen, because that's always an issue when you're moving into developing countries, is what if these devices fall into the wrong hands? What if the data falls into the wrong hands? What if somebody just tries to sell them en masse? Well, we can see that, and we can block them, or we can even what's called brick them, which means that any device, we can see what's happening on it, and if it's something untoward is happening, we can frazzle it so that it becomes a very expensive brick. It's completely unusable. And even if the person factory resets it, doesn't matter. We've still got access. They can't get access to it without us giving them permission. So this is great. And that's the hardware side. The software side is that they can link into this group world anywhere in the world. They can communicate with each other on any device, whether it be a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a headset, or a virtual reality device, and they can do group activities. They can view things on the screen. They can talk to each other. They can bring in objects and manipulate them together. They can be transported into 360-degree live video environments so that class trips become instantaneous and free. They can go anywhere in the world. We were at the CERN Large Hadron Collider in Europe yesterday doing a lesson, and then immediately we were watching a rocket launch straight afterwards. It's awe-inspiring, and it means that when they go back into these group environments, they can have a discussion about what they just saw. Again, I could go on about this all day, so I'm going to shut up and move on, okay? I get excited about this stuff. The same technology can be used in manufacturing and design. I don't know if anybody here happens to be on the release of the new Varjo XR3. Varjo is a Finnish company in Finland, and they've come up with an extremely sophisticated extended reality pass-through headset. Now, what that means is the representation of the real world is being passed through cameras and processors, and then you view it on the screen. It's not like it's projected onto the back of a pair of glasses that you're actually seeing effectively a very, very recent recording. The resolution is beyond what the human eye can pick up. It can see where you're looking, so it will give you the full resolution where you're looking, but not where you're not looking, so that reduces the bandwidth requirements dramatically. But the main thing is it's super sophisticated, it's very high powered, which means you can bring in CAD models or very sophisticated models of, in this case, an aircraft engine, take it to pieces, bring it back together, remove components, add them, subtract them, and you can do this as a group. So developers all around the world can be working with you on this in real time, and it is detailed enough that you can send it directly to rapid manufacturing or CNC machines, and they can confidently manufacture it based on what you came up with in the virtual world. Now, to give you an example of the cost savings involved in this, Bell are a helicopter production company, and an aerospace company. Now, this is a couple of years ago, so this is using far less sophisticated equipment. They reduced the time it took to design and refine a helicopter from 6 years to 6 months. Now, bearing in mind that that could be £1 million of development budget every day, and they've just saved themselves 5.5 years, you do the maths. Now, that was years ago. We've got it down to hours. We're working with the likes of Babcock and Shell in order to create representations of oil platforms and get the actual installation, get all of the stakeholders in the room, from finance to development, project development, engineers, and they can all see what's happening, and then they can work out what goes where, how it connects, how long it's going to take to develop and build and install. Everybody's engaged. Nobody has to leave the office to do it. Now imagine, okay, I'll move on. Oops, I think I've skipped something. Haha. My favourite subject, data. Data is normally the premise of data scientists, people who can look at a histogram and immediately understand what they're looking at. Now, this can be a problem for those of us, basically the rest of the world, who aren't familiar with data science. And again, the best way to actually get this information communicated to people is to be in the room with the person who's the expert and say, look, I don't understand what I'm looking at. Can you explain it to me? This is a system that we're partnered with called Virtualytics. Virtualytics is a virtual reality environment which brings extraordinarily complicated data sets into a virtual environment where it contextualizes that information. What we're looking at here is earthquake incidences around the world, depending on tectonic plates. The larger columns that are in red are the higher incidences, the higher risk areas, and this is being used by people who are insuring buildings. So this is really relevant to them, right? But they can at a glance see that this area of central EMEA is going to be okay for development, but you do not want to be over to the right of the globe there or in the San Andreas Fault, because you're far more likely to get. So you see how this is just one example. We're using it for everything from COVID incidents around the world. We're using it for house prices in different parts of North America. It doesn't matter, but the main thing is you can get different people in the world. It uses artificial intelligence to bring in normal CSV database information and turn it into something that people can understand and have a discussion about. Very important, saves a lot of time and couldn't really be done outside of a three-dimensional environment. Okay, how am I doing for time? I've got 10 minutes, so I'll go into augmented reality now. Medicine again. Okay, so Hololens by Microsoft is a really good system because it's very, very light, and it's untethered, which means it doesn't have to be connected to a powerful laptop, which gives the user freedom of movement. We talk about 6DoF, or 6 degrees of freedom. That usually just means that you can walk around, crouch, stand up, and look around in all directions, and the images will follow you. What we're looking at here is information which has been drawn from a CT scan. In some cases it can be an MRI scan or it can be an X-ray, and it is overlaid onto the patient's real body, so that before the surgeon makes their first cut, they know exactly where the fracture is, they know exactly, and they're using this in brain surgery, they know exactly where the hemorrhage is, they know about movement within if they do it recently enough. It means that they don't accidentally cut into the wrong place. It means that they avoid that all-important artery, which they have to avoid nicking. It means that they can do the surgery in a fraction of the time that is normally required. Now, this is obviously only representational, so they're still going to have to use their real eyes, but they can, to compare the difference between what they're seeing from the scan and what they're seeing in the real world. But the difference is minuscule. So far being reported as being sub-millimeter accuracy in many cases, apart from settling, which is when you're dealing with the inside of your abdominal cavity and things move around when you lie down. But if the scan is done in the same position, not a problem. imagine the savings of lives as well as time being unconscious, because the longer you're unconscious on the operating table, the higher the risks of not waking up. If you can save time in the operating table, not only does this allow more people to be worked on, but it means that they're at less risk, less people will die, and a life saved is priceless. Navigation. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Google's recent move in the direction of using augmented reality navigation. It didn't really work. I'll be honest, a lot of the stuff that Google tries doesn't ultimately end up working. They'll just keep trying. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I like their approach. Now, they were seriously concerned with this because it was working on a mobile phone. And what they did not want was people looking at their mobile phone at the little graphical representation of a fox, which is what they'd used that you had to follow, because they didn't want people walking out into the road and getting run over. So it was constantly sending you messages saying, don't use this as you're walking, but that was the whole point, was to use it as you were walking, right? Now, the problem with using a mobile phone is it's a binary experience. Your attention is focused on the phone or it's focused on the world around you. We think it's focused on both, it isn't. If you've ever been in a, say, restaurant looking at your phone and it runs out of batteries, you notice that weird sensation that the world comes back into being around you because you actually weren't paying any attention to it at all. So that is very dangerous for navigation. You wouldn't want to do that while you're on a bike or even in a car. But going back to these things, if you can see the real world around you and what you have is effectively a translucent overlay onto the world around you, then you're relatively safe. Your distractions are less, your contextualization of where that information is are much more accurate. You don't have to look up and down and make comparisons. It's all there, right there. And this is already being tried by Mercedes and BMW as heads-up displays for vehicles, so that you're not having to look down at your sat-nav. It's actually safer to be looking at this on your windscreen, because you can see what's happening. Now, we could do this while we're walking down the street, and it doesn't just tell us where to go, it tells us where's a local shop, where's a local sale. It could overlay graffiti, virtual graffiti on the world for those of us who are interested in street art. It could overlay music. It could create entirely different worlds for everybody who's got a different filter to look at. But mainly, it will help us with navigation and wayfinding. The military, as you might imagine, is putting a lot of money and investment into this. A lot of technology is driven by the military because they have such huge budgets. And so therefore, they are putting money into using the likes of Tesla suits, as well as augmented reality, as well as weaponry and machinery, because a lot of what they do is mainly engineering rather than combat, so that they can see if they can train people in a safer environment to be better at what they do. Now, their reasoning behind this, particularly in this case, is to train people not to accidentally shoot people who are not meant to be shot. It's also being used for training people to fix vehicles and on site, training people to fly fighter jets, training people to pilot vessels at sea, and all of this can be done from any location at a fraction of the cost that it would normally be done. And because it's picking up on everything, including your stress responses, your body temperature, your speed of reaction, it actually gives you an idea of where that individual is weakest, even when they're not aware that they're weak. It can pick up on where their delays are. It can pick up on things that stress them out and increase their heart rate or increase their sweat levels or body temperature, so that these things can be worked on specifically. Then we come to retail. Now, retail has a lot to gain at the moment because for the last 15 years, it's been losing out dramatically to online sales. So conventional retail was really losing out to this, and even online retail was losing out to the lack of contextualization of products. Now, IKEA have been big movers in this. IKEA for a long time have been contextualizing products. Even if you go to an IKEA warehouse, you'll see they've got their market section, but they've also got their section where it's a bed is placed in a bedroom environment next to all of the products and bookcases and so forth, for style, for size, for everything. They've been doing this for years. They're masters at it. But then they thought, well, why represent a room that somebody might have when we can use the room that they actually do have and transplant an accurate scale representation of the item of furniture that they're interested in into that room. Now, these are accurate to within a 2% tolerance, and I have tested this. and it is accurate to within a 2% tolerance. It does not require an app to be downloaded. You simply click on the link in the catalogue or in the online catalogue and it will appear, and then you just point your phone where you're thinking that you want to put the chair and it will appear at scale. If you want to see it in blue, blue. If you want to see it in red, red. Easy. It dramatically reduces return rates because people don't get any nasty surprises when the thing arrives. Oh, this bed doesn't fit in my bedroom, or this doesn't look right for the room. They've tested all of this out virtually and instantaneously before they made the order. So again, huge savings of money. You can customize the content, as I mentioned, which can really put people off. They go, well, I don't want a green one. But they didn't realize that actually the thing is available in red, and that was maybe the only thing stopping them from buying it. It doesn't have the same language issues that many descriptions on websites can have, because you're not really having to use language. You're looking at an image that's giving you the information that you need. It's more engaging, but it also, funnily enough, increases the number of visits to stores. Now, we've been using things like Matterport, virtual reality, and augmented reality to represent actual interiors of offices, of retail units, and of domestic properties. And the concern from the people selling these was they want people to physically walk in there. And they said, well, if they can do this digitally or virtually, they won't have any reason to come in physically. As it transpires, they were wrong. The actual physical visits are increased by up to 60%, because in the person's mind, they've been there already. So the rest of their mind is just trying to keep up, and it's making lots and lots of tiny decisions that they're unaware of to make the real world match up with the perceived world. This is when we get back into psychology, which is another interest of mine, which actually increases physical engagement where that is possible. Now, obviously, at the moment, physical engagement and physical visits aren't really possible, so it's a replacement. But when things open up and movement opens up again, it will be an augmentation. It will bring people back to the physical world rather than replacing it. And there is much statistical information to back this up. And again, I'm more than happy to provide it. So if people aren't convinced, then I can help you with that. So that's me coming to the end of my talk. I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. And if anybody would like to speak to me after this session, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the link there. I'm on there all the time. So I'll be able to answer your questions whenever you want. And that's me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. It was an amazing talk. So we have this one question for you. In future, it seems developers will only limited applications interacting with specific part of the augmented world inside a large AR OS.
I understand. Actually, I don't think that's what's going to happen. Certainly that would, if you were to follow the, I can see why that questioner asked this question, because if you're to follow the trends at the moment, it would seem that what we have is, what do we call it now? Compartmentalization of the augmented reality world, people creating little sections that they have control over. Now, this is going to be an odd analogy to make, but I want you to think of a mass extinction event. When you have a mass extinction event, all of the established providers or all of the established predators and herbivores and so forth are wiped out, and a whole new raft of evolutionary species appear, many of them. And because there's very little competition and sometimes quite a lot of resources, they can all survive and they all make their own way, strange little creatures with 3 legs or whatever that are, would never survive in the modern world. And as time goes on, what happens is that predators evolve, and those predators will effectively predate these smaller, less efficient creatures until only the best prey animals and the best predators survive. And this is limited down to a smaller and smaller and smaller number. Now, the commercial world is exactly like that. With any new technology, with any new replacement technology, you end up with lots and lots and lots of new entrants, all of whom have their own little sections of the world that they control, and then they get eaten. They get bought and merged and amalgamated into larger and larger predator companies. So what then happens is you end up with very large portions of the world. If you think back to search engines, there used to be a lot of search engines, and now there's pretty much Google. And in the Western world anyway, in China it's very different. But that means that we can have confidence that if we create something or if we optimize a website for Google, it's going to work, right? Whereas back in the day, and I used to do this about 20 years ago, you had to optimize for loads and loads and loads of different search engines. So that's already starting to happen in certainly the virtual reality world. I would suggest that web-based virtual reality is likely to replace app-based virtual reality. So the likes of Glue and Engage and so forth, where you have to download an app onto your computer and pay for it monthly, could be replaced by the likes of Mozilla Hubs, where you don't have to do any of that. You click on a link and you're in. That's it. And it's this one thing that everybody can access, a metaverse for those of us who are familiar with the fiction. The same thing is likely to happen with augmented reality, because at the moment, a lot of augmented reality is app-based. You have to download an app to access it, but increasingly, and you'll be seeing this yourselves, the advent of Vectory and 8th Wall, Blipper, Zappar, these are web-based. You click on a link, the thing appears. And these things can now be animated and interactive. They can now connect with specific parts of the world. And if you go back to when I was talking about SLAM and the digital twins of the world, where these will be developed and built by people just walking through the world wearing a pair of glasses that are taking it in, that is likely, I would say, looking at the trends of history, to all go into a single accessible model of the world that any of these systems can access. And by using web-based AR, anybody can develop for the AR metaverse in general. So I would say at the moment, yes, it's true, but in the future, we will be able to access something which is a lot broader than that. That's just my thinking on it, though. I could be wrong.
Perfect. So we have one more question for you. So let's talk about Microsoft Neural TTS and holograms that they presented in Inspire 2019. How far do you see something like that will be, in production and available to public?
This is where, if I'm not mistaken, this is where instead of the device that you're using doing all the grunt work, doing all the hard work in terms of creating models, and you have to download them, the information is streamed to the device. In the same way that previously, if we wanted to watch a film on our computer, we had to download the whole film onto the computer, but now we just stream it using Netflix. Much more efficient, requires far less processor power, and as long as you have the bandwidth, you can access it on a relatively modestly spec'd device. Very important in the world of virtual and digital and augmented reality, because the size of these models is huge. You're not just dealing with visual frames, you're dealing with spatial data, you're dealing with the polygons, texture maps, you name it. That is being developed by Microsoft and is mainly developed for the likes of HoloLens, because as I mentioned, HoloLens is an untethered standalone device, so therefore it can't carry around the memory or the processing power of a tethered device, which is connected to a large, heavy, powerful laptop or computer, which is great. But that's only Microsoft. That's only HoloLens. So what's the use of that to somebody who's using a Pico Neo 2 or a Quest, right? Fortunately, I've come across an organization which is doing exactly the same thing, streamed polygonal information, which will go to any device. It's device agnostic. And that, I'm afraid, Microsoft, sorry, Bill Gates, is going to replace the system that we're talking about here, because there is no restriction. Anyone can access it. And basically, as long as you've got the server space, you've got the data center, or you're using AWS or something like that, you can run something like this and it will stream the data if the latency is low enough to your device, and it will allow you to access, manipulate, and multiply interact with one model from many different locations simultaneously.
Hi, David. Actually, that was me who asked the question. So what I meant was, I remember one video from Inspire 2019. There was a woman, she was wearing glasses or something, and another woman replicated in a holographic presentation right in front of her, and she told that this will going to be next web conferencing future kind of a thing. So my question was, how far do you see something like that from Microsoft or from any other vendor coming into the production and available to the public? What do you think? I mean, how soon?
It's happening right now. It's a good question, and she said it would happen within the next couple of years. It's happening now. We're already doing this for the oil and gas industry and the offshore renewables industry, particularly for training. And We're using a system called Skyrail, which comes from the aviation sector, and it was again for development and construction of CAD models within the virtual world. Now, these aren't holograms in the sense that they're appearing in thin air in front of you, but they are holograms in the sense that they are fully spatially three-dimensionally live objects which you can manipulate and work on in real time. So in terms of holograms and holography, it's being done at the moment as well, but it's still not hugely sophisticated. It's contained within a specific area, and it's really just something moving very, very fast, like an old cathode ray tube television. It involves physical moving parts. The actual merits of having free world holography is limited when you've got something which you can put on like a pair of glasses that, to all intents and purposes, anybody who's wearing those glasses is seeing a hologram anyway. So the thing that I was talking about with Skyrail, it does require a fair amount of processing power. So at the moment, you wouldn't be able to do it with an untethered pair of Nreal glasses, for instance. It would have to be something connected to another object. So we're looking at Hololens and another one called Kybertech, which is used in the industrial world. So yes, all of this is possible right now. And the good thing is it will take the information directly from CAD models, you manipulate it, and then it will export it directly into any CAD or BIM format. So it can be then used and manipulated in finer detail and more conventional packages.
Okay, I have just one more question,
Perfect.
David, if you allow me.
Yeah.
Okay, by the way, great session so far. And my question is, are there any lasting physical effects of using virtual and augmented reality?
That's a very good question, and actually it's probably too early to say because it's such a new technology, so I don't want to be one of these people that go, oh, it's fine, because a lot of the time we don't realize what the lasting effects are until years later. What I can say is that our eyes and ears respond very, very quickly when they're uncomfortable with something. If your eyes are giving your brain different information from what your ears are giving them, which is mostly things like movement and, you know, position in space, that's actually your ears giving you that weird effect as an early warning sign of poisoning. So your body responds with nausea. So that's why with earlier technology, like augmented and virtual reality technology, people would get nauseous with it because their eyes were saying you're moving, but their ears were saying you're not, and your brain would go, I'm probably being poisoned right now. It's probably a good idea to vomit. So that was making people uncomfortable. Fortunately, with 6 degrees of freedom, we can move around properly in all the different dimensions, and that latency, that delay and that discrepancy, that difference between what the ears are saying and what the eyes are saying is gone. So that's really helping to reduce or even eliminate nausea, but that's only one thing. I've been speaking to ophthalmologists and optometrists about the dangers of using heads-up displays that are only monocular, right? Like, there's a few that are used in the industrial world where it's literally just a thing which comes down in front of one eye and you look at it, or the Vuzix Blade, which is again monocular heads-up display. That's fine if everybody has an eye which is good at close up and far away, but it differs from person to person. And the problem with these devices is they only give you the close-up view on one eye. Now, I was brought up with a family who suffered from migraines, and usually there's a few different things which will stimulate migraine. One of them is hormonal imbalance, other ones are water or electrolyte imbalance, and the other one is problems with your eyesight. If you're constantly looking at something through one eye that's really close and one eye that's really far away, you're gonna get migraines. You're gonna get eye strain, you're gonna get problems. So I was having conversations with the people that were creating this technology saying you cannot do this. It has to be binocular, because otherwise you're going to end up coming into problems and you'll be the one getting the lawsuits, but they wouldn't listen. Fortunately, newer companies like Nreal, amongst many others, went the binocular route, and that seems to have alleviated many of these problems. There are issues of psychology though. What if somebody gets so immersed in the virtual world that they cease to connect to the real world? Seems unlikely, but even in screen-based entertainment, massive multiplayer online gaming, people have died. People have starved to death because they've been so engaged in that game that they haven't got up to go and feed themselves. It's happened many times. So if we are now streaming fully immersive tactile content? Are we going to get to the stage where we cease to be able to differentiate from the real world to the virtual world? Are we going to get to the stage where our real life is put at risk or suffers because of our digital life? It's possible. There's another issue, and we've seen this with social media and the effect it has on our well-being, our mental health. And the problem, something that really concerns me, is that Oculus is now owned by Facebook. Now, if you look at the new Oculus Quest 2 device, you can buy the enterprise Oculus Quest 2 device. That will cost you €900. Or you can buy the Oculus Quest 2 consumer device. That will cost you €300. Why the price difference? Are they different hardware? No, they're not. They're exactly the same. The difference is the consumer device is harvesting your data. The consumer device is doing all the tricks, or is designed to do all the tricks that Facebook and Instagram do to get your information, to make you addicted, to make you go in there all the time. Now that is bad enough when you're doing it on your phone or on your computer, because we've seen again the effects this has had: suicide rates, general lack of well-being, fake news, polarization of opinion. How bad could that be?
I'm sorry to interrupt you over here. Sorry, David, I'm interrupting you. But we have 2-3 questions for you, and we are out of time. Can you please answer them quickly?
No problem.
Sorry to interrupt you. For there are a lot of questions for you. Just make it quickly.
Okay.
Thank you. Madhya, please continue.
So what other questions?
Perfect. So another question is, should the developers focus on learning psychology apart from technology?
Learning psychology, yes, absolutely. In fact, I am doing most of my work with people who are not virtual reality specialists. They're trainers, they are pedagogical specialists, they are lecturers and so forth. And we're also doing our work with students. I'm just about to release a video which is going to give the feedback from the students that we did a study a couple of weeks ago that was subsequently endorsed by the Ministry of International Trade in the United Kingdom, to say what they found that they enjoyed about it, also what they found was weak about it, and we're going to develop it very much from the learner and the lecturer's perspective. The technology should only ever be a means to an end. The end should be education.
So the other one is, what path a complete beginner can choose to start learning VR?
Sorry, could you say that again?
What path a complete beginner can choose to start learning VR?
Ah, right. Okay. Yes. Good questions. Both Unreal and Unity are the two main gaming engines, actually, who most virtual reality is based around. Now, they have a vested interest in making sure that as many people develop as much content for their platforms as possible, and they're in competition with each other. Unity works on practically any device, and it's a really, really good business related and even consumer related 3D engine. Unreal has fallen behind a bit. It's a bit heavier, it's a bit more detailed, it's good for visual stuff, and they've made all their money off Fortnite and I think Minecraft. So they're trying to catch up. So they're both investing loads of money in free training that you can access online, and it will teach you how to use their platforms really, really easily. I also do some work for the Google's digital garage through a company called Upskill Digital. And they provide, or just about to provide, a lot of beginners information, education that you can access free online. One last thing, Stack Overflow, brilliant place to learn any new digital learning at all. So I would look there as well.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you so much, David. It was nice having you in our session today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.